Hi guys, I hope you're well and welcome to episode 70 of the James Layton Fitness Podcast. Now in this episode we're going to be discussing weight training fundamentals. So we're going to be discussing some really key fundamental principles that you should be applying to your weight training, whether you have goals for fat loss or muscle growth. I'm going to discuss the nuances within your weight training for fat loss and muscle growth. So without further ado, let's dive straight into the podcast. So let's firstly look at the overall objective for either muscle gain or fat loss with regards to your weight training. So firstly, with regards to fat loss, that overall fundamental goal of our weight training within a fat loss phase is just maintaining as much muscle mass as possible. That is the overall principle of the fat loss phase, is having weight training as the foundation of your routine to maintain as much muscle mass as possible, and then you're creating the energy deficit from reducing calories and or adding more cardio, a combination of those two factors. With regards to muscle gain, the ultimate goal is increasing volume and strength over time. So that is the biggest significant factor on hypertrophy, is volume with the caveat the load's heavy enough. Doesn't necessarily have to go up from session to session, but if you were to look back at your previous 6 months weight training experience and your goals for increasing muscle gain, that volume should be gradually going up over time. So volume is basically sets times reps times load. Now the first principle I want to discuss is compound lifts versus isolation exercises. So the main component of your weight training should be mainly compound lifts, and compound lifts are basically multi-joint exercises. They're exercises where you're using a lot of different muscle groups, and as such you can use the most amount of weight within these lifts. So examples are things like deadlifts, squats, bench press, overhead presses, heavy rowing variations, anything where there's more than one muscle group actively involved in the movement. Whereas an isolation exercise would be like a bicep curl. It's just the biceps, obviously a little bit front delt, but mainly just the biceps which are working within the movement. Now the reason why we want to have the compound lifts as our main foundation within our routine is these are the exercises we can build the most amount of strength on. These are the exercises we can increase volume the most. If our goal is hypertrophy, muscle growth, having these big compound movements is going to allow us to increase volume over time the most. Additionally, it's going to help retain muscle mass within the fat loss phase because we're using heavier loads in comparison to isolation exercise within the fat loss phase. These exercises really help to maintain muscle mass and strength within the fat loss phase. Now, with that being said, that doesn't necessarily mean that isolation exercises don't have their place. They absolutely do, but it's having a supplement of both. Compound exercise should make up the start of your weight training session, then you'll have some isolation exercises at the end. But those key fundamental lifts like squat, deadlift, bench press, overhead press, and variations of these movements should make up the main focus of your weight training. Now next I want to discuss training frequency. So this is a big misconception within the fitness industry. Most people are following the traditional body part splits where they're training everything once per week, and the reason why most people follow this advice is because they follow their favorite bodybuilder, but their favorite bodybuilder is more than likely juiced to the gills on anabolic steroids. So in short, this person can train however they like and they're going to see dramatic physique and strength improvements because they're on anabolic steroids. That doesn't necessarily mean it's optimal for a natural trainee. So what's more optimal for a natural trainee is actually hitting muscle groups more frequently, hitting each muscle group 2 to 3 times per week. Now the reason for this is we can stimulate muscle protein synthesis more frequently. In addition to that, it's easier to accumulate volume by training muscle groups more frequently. If you just train chest once per week, it's very difficult to progressively increase volume over time without the session being ridiculously long. But by splitting up into 2 to 3 sessions, we can easily accumulate volume, and in addition to that we can stimulate muscle protein synthesis more frequently. Now I'm not saying you can't make progress on a single body part split routine. You absolutely can, but the reality is we want to focus on what's more optimal, not what our favourite bodybuilder is doing. Let's focus on what's optimal for a natural trainee. Next thing I want to focus on is the nuances between a fat loss phase and a muscle building phase. So the only nuance would be within a fat loss phase is volume might be slightly less, just because we don't have as many calories to recover from. We're obviously in an energy deficit, we're trying to lose body fat, and therefore volume is going to be slightly less. We'll mainly focus on trying to maintain as much strength as possible in the fat loss phase, and there may actually be some strength losses at the end of the fat loss phase. Whereas with the muscle building phase, volume will be slightly higher because that's the main thing we're slowly trying to increase over time. Now, the next thing I want to discuss is weaker body parts. As you become more advanced, as soon as you're past the 2 years of weight training experience, you may discover that you have some muscle groups that are more developed than others, and this is a great time to start making the training program more specific to you, i.e. by adding more volume to some of these weaker body parts. We can really focus on developing these, so then you've got more of a balanced physique. So that will be my next suggestion for those people that are past the 2 years weight training experience and they have some glaring weaker body parts. So start training these body parts more frequently with more volume, so more sets, more exercise, etc. That will be a great recommendation. You'll be really amazed the progress you can see if you have any lagging body parts. Next point I want to discuss is periodization for your big compound lifts. Now, if you're in the beginner phase, i.e. under 6 months weight training experience, you don't really need to do too much with regards to your compound lifts. If you perform these exercises frequently, you're going to get stronger by default. When you get to the intermediate phase, it might be worth having different rep ranges on a week-to-week basis. But as you get more advanced, it does just become more difficult to make strength gains consistently. And the reality is you need to, instead of looking at strength gains from session to session, you're looking more at strength gains every month, every 6 weeks. As you get more advanced, you do have to be slightly cuter with your periodization for your big key compound lifts. And that, I would suggest looking at some percentage-based programs. If you type that into Google, you'll find various different options available to you. And the goal is really just to focus on progression over time. At that stage, if you're past the intermediate phase, you're really not going to see strength gains from session to session. So by having a percentage-based program, this allows you to make strength gains month to month rather than trying to make strength gains from session to session. Next point I want to discuss is isolation progression schemes. So as you already know, the compound lifts, the main fundamental lifts, your strength will go up much easier than your isolation exercises. However, with isolation exercises, you still want to strive for progress, but for example, if you're doing dumbbell curls, say if you're doing 20 kilograms and then you go to the next set up 22 kilograms, that's a 10% jump in load. So whereas when we're doing the barbell lifts, it's easy to add a small percentage increment, but a 10% jump is almost way too much. So what I like to do for my isolation exercises is have rep ranges, and you're focusing on increasing reps first before you increase the weight. So for example, if you're doing bicep curls and you've got a target rep range of 8 to 12, I'd focus on getting all of your sets up to the top of the rep range, i.e. 3 sets of 12 for example, before increasing the load. So let's just say for example week 1 you do a set of 9, a set of 8, a set of 7. The next week you maybe get a set of 10, set of 9, set of 9, and then you're slowly increasing the reps from week to week until you can get to the top of the rep range, 3 sets of 12, before increasing the weight, and then you repeat the cycle. You focus on increasing reps first until you're at the top of the rep range before you increase the load. So hopefully this has been useful, kind of covered relatively wide spectrum of different nuances within weight training. So hopefully this has been useful. If you're still yet to download my free ebook, How to Set Up a Nutrition Plan, if you go to James Layton, Layton fitness.co.uk, see a tab at the top of the page and you can download that immediately. So hopefully you found this useful, and I look forward to speaking to you next week. Take care. Thank you.